mentorship sessions. As I noted in my email to everybody, this is a series that we set up this year to provide employers with mentorship sessions from on different subjects from experts in the field. So as last week, we had an expert who talked about some research. We had a processor. Today as well, we've got an expert in the field of working with people with disabilities, as well as a processor with Morgan Mackenzie from Denninger. And the idea is to share some best practices and insights. With that, I'd like to introduce Morgan Mackenzie from Denninger. Morgan is a passionate HR professional who's been in the HR field for 7 years. She holds her CHRL or CHRP designations, and currently in the position of HR manager at Denninger, a specialty food retailer in Hamilton. And then we also have with us today from the Supported Employment Alliance. I'm going to get this right, Donald. Donald Guse Salah. Donald is an inclusive workforce specialist, supporting the national expansion of Canadian workforce innovation, responsible for strategic partnership development, consultation, and training for businesses to facilitate inclusive recruitment and retention, and providing recruitment support. Both Donald and Morgan have been great supporters of the CareersNOW program. Donald, I believe, Donald, this is your second year you've helped out CareersNOW, so thank you both for your help. And also like to introduce Luis Garcia from Meat and Poultry Ontario. Luis is one of our partners on the CareersNOW team, and Luis is responsible for outreach to employers in the meat and poultry sector in Ontario. So welcome, Luis, as well. So with that, I will pass over to Donald, and I will let you take over.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate the introduction. Very good job getting my last name, both of them, correct. Always nice. I'm going to share my screen. So as Jason introduced me, I'm supporting the national expansion of a program called Canadian Partners in Workforce Innovation. I'll let you know just briefly what that is so you understand where I'm coming from. And I'll also, I guess I'll explain the Supported Employment Alliance, since that was in my introduction as well. That is a network of supported employment programs supporting job seekers with disabilities that operates throughout the GTA that I founded and continue to lead. I founded it about 7 years ago. But my actual work right now is specifically focused on supporting employers to successfully recruit and retain job seekers with disabilities as a solution to workforce needs. I was doing that with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce for a couple of years prior to moving over to CanWin. And so just a bit about CanWin and what we do. All of our services are free, and we provide training and consultation services for businesses in order to support their ability to prepare and be confident to recruit and retain job seekers with disabilities. And then we provide free ongoing recruitment and retention supports in order to address workforce needs through inclusive employment. So as we go through the material here, if you're interested in receiving any kind of training or consultation, or you'd like some recruitment services or recruitment support, I should say, by all means, please feel free to reach out. And the resources that you see at the end of this presentation will be available to you. I'm going to send the slide deck to Jason so it can be shared with everyone. So to begin with, I think it's important when we're talking about disability and employment and accessibility and all those things that we define what the terms we're using are. So I've got the World Health Organization's definition of disability for you here, which is that disability results from the interaction between individuals with a health condition and with personal and environmental factors, including negative attitudes, inaccessible transportation in public buildings, and limited social support. So what we can see here is that, in effect, disability results from mismatched interactions between a person's body or their experience of the world and the rest of the society that they're interacting with, which means that accessibility and accommodations means addressing the mismatched interactions through informed attitudes and decision making, reducing barriers, and increasing support. This is a good definition because we can solve for mismatched interactions. We can't solve for health conditions and things like that, and nor should we. That's not not our job. The idea is to make things accessible for more people to be able to participate effectively. And of course, that has a broader impact than just including job seekers with disabilities. This kind of approach can have positive benefit when considering multiple population demographics. Think of newcomers, people with English as a second language, cultural differences, seniors, the LGBTQ2S+ community, and so on and so forth. So being accessible looks like making a commitment to make the effort, right? You have to actually want to do it in order to do it properly. You need to be ready to potentially change certain practices, maybe modify or adapt them in order to make an environment more accessible so people can perform productively. Purposefully engage in inclusive recruitment, and we'll discuss a little bit about what that looks like, but it needs to be more than just putting a job posting on a certain job board, and then adapting operations to address accessibility considerations for patrons and making accommodations for employment. Because of course, if your businesses are customer facing, you want them to be accessible so that you can attract a wider patronage from the community, and you want to be able to employ people in an accessible way. So before I give you some answers, since we can see people here, since people can unmute and share, I'd love to get some thoughts from those who are on the call, if you're willing, as to some reasons why you might want your business to be accessible. I know we're being recorded, so if you're not comfortable unmuting and saying anything, that's fine, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to share your thoughts here.
I'll jump in. I think that anything that increases diversity is always a benefit to a business.
That's a great response. I like that. Actually, in a different training deck that I have, one of the statistics or sort of studies that I quote is one from I cannot remember who does it. I think it might be. You know what? I don't want to misquote, but I can send the resource. But one of the things that's been found is, in order to have a more engaged workforce, and obviously having a more engaged workforce is going to be more productive, the number one reason cited by employee responses and business experience is to have a diverse workforce. Having a diverse workforce increases employee engagement, not just employee satisfaction, which then results in higher productivity. So that's a great insight. Thank you for sharing that.
Welcome.
So I will share some not exciting and then some more exciting reasons. The not exciting reason to be accessible is, of course, it's legislated. I certainly acknowledge this is not the best reason, but it is a reason. I'm not going to spend much time on the AODA, but you can see here, the primary requirements for businesses of the size of 1 to 49 employees or 50 plus. And the primary difference here is that businesses with 50 plus employees are required to have accommodation plans in place and return to work processes in place and documented. If you're on the AODA site, they don't really differentiate between businesses that are fewer than 20 employees, fewer than 50 employees. They have different sections for businesses with 1 to 20 or businesses with 20 to 21 to 49, but the requirements are the same. So obviously, meeting compliance needs is a good reason to be accessible, but there are better reasons. There are reasons related to business prosperity, and those are more exciting. So let's talk about those in a little bit more detail. The Canadian population is represented by about 1/5, 22%, by people with disabilities. These statistics are taken from the 2017 census. There have been some figures released from the census that was taken during the pandemic, which says that 27% of the Canadian population is represented by people with disabilities. But I think we can all agree that the pandemic does not represent a baseline experience for any part of the Canadian population. So I'm sticking with the 2017 figures. A lot of people during the pandemic experienced mental health occurrences that had never existed before, and hopefully won't exist for them again. And that would have bumped up the baseline of people who were self-identifying as being a person with a disability. So we'll go with the 22% figure, which is still 1/5 of the population. That's a large potential talent pool. That is also a lot of your potential consumer base. And when it comes to customer loyalty, you see that 87% of people have indicated they prefer to give their business to companies who hire inclusively. So having a diverse workforce is going to have a positive impact on customer loyalty, and having a business that is accessible for patrons as well as for employees is going to mean that more people with disabilities are able to patronize your establishment. People with disabilities also demonstrate a higher retention rate and lower absenteeism. A 30-year report by DuPont in the United States shows that people with disabilities have equal or higher performance ratings, better retention rates, and less absenteeism. So higher retention and lower absenteeism is generally going to result in lower costs associated with things like onboarding and more capital that you can invest in your business operations. And that brings us to the final point here, which is sustainable business operations. The Valuable 500, a group of 500 of the most profitable companies globally, has stated that failing to account for the disabled population poses a risk to a company's brand, employee base, and capacity to operate. I would expect they know what they're talking about, so I think it's worth keeping that in mind when we consider sustainable business operations and business prosperity. And then finally, there's the straight up money reason. Right, 1/5 of the population, like I said, is a large potential talent pool and consumer base. And when we're talking about the consumer base, the statistic I have here is actually about 10 or more years old. So the amount of disposable income that is controlled by people with disabilities globally is going to be higher than what you see on the screen here. But still, at the time, 10 or more years ago, 3.4 billion potential customers controlling over 13 trillion in annual disposable income. And although these are global figures, I think they're still relevant. You can extrapolate from that to get an idea of the significant amount of disposable income controlled by this population within Canada. And of course, for anyone that operates online stores, you have access to a potential consumer base that goes beyond just who is walking in the door. So when it comes to accessibility, when you're considering what do you do? How do you do it? It's good to have a list of things to go through. It's good to have an idea of what you're going to do and maybe prioritize certain elements. This list, this checklist is not in order of, what I think you should prioritize. It's just in the order that I happened to write it out in. We already went over a bit about why you would want to be more accessible. When it comes to do you use diverse recruitment methods, what we're talking about here is things like, are you partnering with community organizations that are supporting talent pools of diverse job seekers? There are surely going to be some in your communities, and they can offer, talent pipelines that you can access, that you can work with in order to have a sustainable and consistent inflow of applicants to the jobs that you're hiring for. There are also programs and websites out there that can help match jobs to people with disabilities. So there's the Ontario Chamber of Commerce's Discoverability Network, which is a job matching platform specifically for employers to get their jobs posted and connected with job seekers with disabilities who will be matched based on skills and qualifications for the job. There's programs like mine, Canadian Partners in Workforce Innovation. We perform recruitment services on behalf of employers by sharing your job opportunities with employment service providers that we work with who are supporting talent pools of job seekers and providing pre-screening services and recommending qualified candidates to you. So there are a number of places you can access these kinds of diverse recruitment methods, and it's worth your while to do so in order to attract talent. Have you improved your job postings? So that really refers to when you consider job postings, that there seems to be a trend in the right direction here. More and more companies are doing this, but your standard job posting lists a laundry list of qualifications that may or may not be necessary. So when you consider your job postings, do they list your bona fide requirements? Do they clearly delineate what is necessary for a successful candidate versus what is an asset so that people know whether or not they're qualified when they apply? Do the job postings clearly articulate the job responsibilities and functions in plain language so they're easily understandable? And when you consider some of the things I just said, again, you can see how this is going to impact a broader demographic than just job seekers with disabilities. Using plain language is going to make job postings more accessible for, yes, job seekers with disabilities, but also people who use English as a second language, newcomers to the country, that sort of thing. ensuring that the qualifications that are listed are clearly specified and only identified as necessary when they are. So eliminating superfluous needs such as extraneous education requirements or unnecessary driver's licenses and things like that. And I use those examples because they're fairly common. Certainly if you're building a suspension bridge over a body of water, you need an architect and an engineer, someone who has that education. But a lot of jobs don't necessarily require that specific educational background. For instance, to be a brick and stone mason and build the walls that surround us, you only need a grade 8 education. So educational requirements, do you actually need them? Are they legitimate? Driver's license is another thing. Most of the jobs I've had, including working in construction, said that I needed a driver's license, but the reality was I didn't. I don't have a driver's license. What I needed was the ability to get from one place to another and remain productive and get to the locations I had to be in on time and punctually, even if that meant getting up at 3:30 in the morning to commute from the heart of Toronto to Newmarket by 8 in the morning without a driver's license, which I did, and it wasn't fun, but the point was I was able to do it. But when we talk about the qualifications, another good point to make is comparing men and women. Men tend to be fairly presumptuous, and when we look at men, we are more likely to apply to jobs as long as we have, or as long as we think we have, about 60% of what are listed as the qualifications for the job. Women are less presumptuous. The statistics show that women are only likely to apply to jobs if they have at least 80% or so of the qualifications. So if you're listing a whole bunch of qualifications that are not actually necessary, if they're not your core requirements or your absolute requirements, then you could end up screening out women without even realizing it. So improving the job postings is going to make them more accessible and available to a wider talent pool. Is your interview process flexible and accommodating? Do you offer questions in advance? Do you offer modified interview formats? Do you offer remote or in person, depending on someone's needs? Right? If someone has maybe hard of hearing and they need to use captions or things like that, would you allow them to do it virtually as opposed to doing it in person? There are all sorts of ways interviews can be made more flexible and accommodating. And you really want to do that because you want to hire the best candidate and you want to assess people accurately and effectively. Providing the same interview format for everybody all the time without compromises or accommodations, using the same sort of standard questions that are maybe situational based as opposed to just focused on candidate strengths and what they bring to the position, only allows you to assess who is able to provide you with the best answers to your standard interview questions. And a lot of us who have been in many interviews know how to answer the standard questions. We know how to game the standard interview format, whereas somebody who maybe has more difficulty with behavioral based or situational based questions or needs interview questions in advance, may be a better fit for the workplace. But if you're not modifying those practices, you're not going to get a feeling for that. And just to give you an example of what I mean, some of your standard questions, tell me of a time you had a conflict in the workplace and how did you address it? Or what would you do in a situation where there's a conflict in the workplace? I, being someone who's used to this format, will give you the answer you're looking for, but that's all I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the answer you're looking for. And I think you know what I'm talking about, right? If you say, how would you address a conflict in a workplace? I'm not going to tell you that I would, go slander the person on social media and throw a pie in their face at the end of the day. I'm going to tell you that I would have a conversation with them to try and explain, my position and understand where they're coming from, and maybe bring in a third-party mediator, see if I can get the supervisor involved to arbitrate our conflict and effect some sort of reconciliation. And that all sounds really nice and grandiloquent, but it doesn't tell you anything about me. It tells you exactly what you would expect to hear. So consider the questions you're asking. Consider what kind of accommodations you could provide in an interview to ensure that everybody can present themselves as effectively as possible. When it comes to accommodations on the job, the rationale is the same. You're going to hire qualified people who can perform the work for you, but the work may be completed differently. Are you flexible? If somebody is able to do 70% of the job really, really well, but they have trouble with maybe 30% of the job, you have other people who can do that 30% really, really well, and then maybe have them work in a complementary fashion where they're sort of, one person is doing more of one thing and another person is doing more of another, so that you have strengths-based workplace, task assignment in the workplace, and your staff are working in a complementary manner, which then increases productivity in general and allows you to be a little more flexible and a little more accommodating. Your print and media and digital spaces, this is more forward-looking or public-looking, whether it's advertisements or your recruitment campaigns. But are they accessible? And I won't go into the details of that right now. That's a whole other training. But it is worth considering whether your print media and digital spaces are accessible. That's important. Are you communicating inclusively? Do you welcome differences with respect to communication? Do you implement understanding of, some people may have difficulty with eye contact. Some people may have flat emotional affects. They may not laugh at jokes. Some people may be very expressive in conversations, speaking about themselves more often. Some people may be very inquisitive in conversations and more reserved about themselves. So are these things that you're welcoming, or are you expecting everybody to sort of fit into a certain mold of the way they socialize and communicate? And are you offering different communication methods? If somebody receives instructions better verbally instead of written, or written instead of verbally, or if they would do better with a task list on their phone, and so on and so forth. Can you reduce environmental stimuli? These are things like overly glaring bright lights, competing auditory stimuli, so having a radio and a television on at the same time, and so on and so forth. And then in the end, are you having fun? I'm a big believer in having fun at work, as you can clearly see. But if you have a more diverse workplace, and if you're implementing all of these things, you should have more fun. People should feel comfortable and more free to be themselves, which means that everybody is going to enjoy themselves more in the workplace. And if people are having fun in the workplace, they're going to be more productive. They're going to have more of an incentive or an impetus to come to work. Now, when it comes to accommodations, I do want to highlight a few things here. One is that disability is a part of the workforce. It's not a matter apart from it. We talk about accommodations a lot with respect to disability and trying to demystify the realities around them. But the primary reality here is that 95% of accommodations are not for people with disabilities. They have nothing to do with disability. They are related to personal reasons, such as special events, holidays and leaves of absence, medical leaves and doctor's appointments, family or caregiver responsibilities, could be childcare, elder care, any number of things, or religious considerations, Easter and Christmas, Muslim daily prayers, Jewish holidays. You may think it's odd that I've listed Easter and Christmas on there. What's that about? Those are stat holidays. Those are stat holidays because we live in a society that was founded by Christians. So they are, in effect, accommodations for Christians. It's just that we all have those stat holidays. But Muslim daily prayers are regular accommodations, Jewish holidays are regular accommodations, and there are a variety of others related to religious considerations. So why consider disability as a matter apart from all others? You're already accommodating without even realizing it. Doing the same thing for disability is no different. So you already probably employ people with disabilities. Generally, employers' concerns with accommodations for people with disabilities relate to the factor of potential undue hardship. But undue hardship is really hard to reach, right? If you're a business with, a large number of stairs, putting in a ramp may be undue hardship. I say maybe because it depends on the nature of it. Putting in an elevator could be undue hardship, but these are not common accommodations. These are, really unlikely, especially if work can potentially be done in a different environment on the ground level or even remotely. And those are all related to very specific physical needs, whereas many disabilities are invisible. You think of mental health, learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and so on and so forth. So it's important to get away from these routine assumptions. So offer accommodations at all stages of the employment life cycle so that people can socialize this, they can talk about it, they can let you know what they need, and you can be prepared. Have individual accommodation plans in place. When you hire people, just put one in place. Ask them what do they need to be successful? What modifications might they need? And ask everybody this, whether they've disclosed a disability or that they need an accommodation or not. And if there's no accommodation necessary, that's your IAP. But if you review them annually, if things change for people, it gives them an already created opportunity to say, you know what, this has changed and I could use this accommodation. And it destigmatizes it and takes away some of the stress and anxiety of trying to figure out how to bring it up. The true costs of accommodations are important to consider here. 60% of employers report no cost to providing an accommodation, and most accommodations cost $500 or less. I think it's about 90% of accommodations or 93% of accommodations are $500 or less. So they're not undue hardship. And statistics and studies show that there's a $28.69 return per dollar invested in accommodations, so it's worth it. And these statistics down here, the top 3 accommodations in Canada, modified work hours, ergonomic chairs, and ergonomic workstations, those statistics are admittedly a bit old. They're from 2006. I've had real trouble finding more up-to-date figures, but I think you can anticipate what might replace one of those in the top 3 accommodations here, which is remote work. Now, that is not going to be possible for a lot of industries. Certainly in food and beverage processing, you need people on site. But the point here is none of these accommodations represent any kind of undue hardship. None of them are difficult to implement. They're all fairly straightforward, and there's no reason why they can't be implemented. So important to get away from the idea that accommodations are going to automatically result in undue hardship. Employers may be required by law to provide accommodations, but you as the employer get to decide the accommodation. So it is a two-way street, and the important thing is to make sure that yes, it works for the employee, but that it also works for you and fits into the business. So because the point is for the accommodation to enable someone to perform a job as productively as possible, and be able to do what you need them to do in the workplace. So your key takeaways are to know why you want to be accessible, review the AODA, and it is important to know your compliance requirements, and I need to fix the grammar in that sentence. Diversify your recruitment practices and processes, look at how you're sourcing talent, review how you can improve that and create new talent pipelines, look at adjusting and accommodating throughout the employment life cycle, interviews, orientation, onboarding, and so on and so forth. Look at accessibility for patrons because you want to attract, obviously, a more diverse customer base, and know where you can find support for all of these things. As I said, CanWin can provide active recruitment support, consultation, and training. We have the Discoverability Network as a job matching platform, hashtag Able2, and Odin for LMS, learning module systems online for asynchronous self-guided learning. There are roadmaps and all sorts of other things available. And as you can see here, I put together a list of resources for you related to all of these things. They'll be shared with Jason to be sent out to everybody and made available to all the CareersNOW food and beverage processing operators. So that is my presentation, and I'm going to hand it over to Morgan Mackenzie now, who's going to give you a more sort of on-the-ground insights as a food and beverage operator.
Thank you, Donald. So my name is Morgan. I'm the HR manager at Denninger, a specialty food retailer and manufacturer in Hamilton. Our purpose at Denninger is to bring great food experiences to life. So as the HR manager, I bring value by developing HR programs that create an excellent employment experience, resulting in the engagement and retention of our team members. This includes creating an inclusive work environment. We're very proud to be recognized in our community as an inclusive employer. So before I go into details about our experience working with people with disabilities, I'd like to note 3 key statistics, some of which Donald's already mentioned, but regarding people hiring people with disabilities. So 1, there's a 72% higher employee retention rate among people with disabilities. 87% of consumers favor companies that hire people with disabilities. And one that I think is the most important to note, as there's a large misconception around the topic, is that 63% of people with disabilities do not actually require an accommodation whatsoever in the workplace. So why we think it's important to hire people with disabilities, the most obvious reason is creating inclusivity in the workplace. We know that diversity brings great value to companies, and that companies with a diverse workforce actually perform at a higher rate than those who do not have. So considering that 22% of people in Ontario identify as individuals with a disability, businesses can't afford not to hire people with disabilities in today's labor market. It is a very underutilized talent pool that brings great value to companies. So hiring people with disabilities, what we look at is the essential functions of the job. this is what Donald has mentioned as the bona fide occupational requirements, but what is the job made up of and what needs to be performed as part of this job? If that individual is able to perform the essential functions of the job, they will be able to fit into this role. So evaluating the essential job functions when looking at your job description and seeing what does this job actually require, and is there anything included in it that is not essential to this job? Then we also consider the transferable skills amongst all of our candidates. So when we're looking at our inclusive hiring practices, we take a few different approaches to it. So first, as we know, it is required to note and offer accommodation in the interview process in your job postings. However, we do this again when we invite an individual to the interview process, making a note of, as a reminder, we do offer accommodation to those who require it in the interviewing process. Please reach out to HR directly prior to your interview if you do require an accommodation. This way that the individual knows that we do accommodate and we're reiterating something so they don't think that it's just something we've put in the job description. This allows them to connect and know who to connect to if they do require an accommodation. So agencies, we do partner with multiple agencies within our community. They've been great for us in connecting the right skills to the job requirements that we're looking for. So I'm going to go into that a little bit more in detail in just a minute. And then also supporting resources. A lot of individuals with disabilities already have a great support network outside of the workforce, and utilizing their support network and their resources that they already have to help them be successful in the workplace, it brings great value to the company. So agencies we work with, Donald and I have been working together for, I think it's about 3 years now. In his previous role and now at CanWin. So at CanWin, what we've done is they've offered strength and skill-based screening for individuals who identify as someone with a disability who require an accommodation in the recruitment process. So some people do not thrive in the regular sit-down Q&A type interview process. So what CanWin offers to do is they look at the strengths of this individual based off of what we're looking for the job, and they use a different form of interviewing to identify those skills to let us know, is this person a right match for our job? That way, when somebody's coming into the interview process, they're not being overlooked because they didn't perform well in a Q&A session. And then Goodwill. Goodwill is also one of our main partners, so we're very proud to be recognized this year as Goodwill's Business Partner of the Year. Specifically, I'd like to talk about the FAST program. So the FAST program is the Food and Beverage Accelerated Skills Training Program through Goodwill. What they do is they, and this is not focused strictly on people with disabilities, but people who face barriers to employment, which would include people with disabilities. But what this program does is it creates or provides introductory knowledge for the food and beverage industry. So individuals coming into the industry and applying to jobs already have a base knowledge on topics such as GMPs, food safety, sanitation. We find that these individuals are prepared for the roles and they're able to hit the ground running when they walk in. So it actually reduces the level of training that we have to give at the beginning because these individuals already come in with a base knowledge of the food and beverage industry. So they have also been a great partner for us in accessing talent who would otherwise have barriers to employment. So both of these programs have come at no cost to us, but have had a great benefit. So different types of accommodations that we've had in the workplace. And to clarify, we have not spent much, if at all, money on accommodation because they've been simple changes to our regular day-to-day practices. So one of the biggest myths about hiring people with disabilities that it is expensive. We found that it's not. As previously mentioned, the 63% of people with disabilities do not require accommodations in their workplaces. And accommodation is more often than not very straightforward and should focus on the individual's needs. So common accommodations that we have seen are support workers during the interview process. Somebody who may require encouragement while they answer the questions, however, come into work and are able to perform the skills and actually excel in the workplace. task lists, which providing a stopwatch and time limits for jobs. So very similar to the concept of time blocking that leaders use to manage their time, but creating a task list with designated time slots so that person knows how to stay on track and how long that job should be taking them. Scheduling flexibility. It's been simple changes to scheduling based off of individual needs. PPE, such as noise canceling earplugs, and assisted training with an occupational therapist. So that is, again, tapping into the external resources that an individual has to help them be successful in the workplace. So our resources, we really lean on our community partners and subject matter experts to help us help the individual to be successful. On an annual basis, we speak to all of our employees about, do you have the resources, materials, and equipment you need to be successful in your role? This is something we talk to everyone about, and different items come up. Asking an individual with a disability, what do you need to be successful in your role, goes a long way. So again, if you're unsure of how to identify how to support somebody, relying on the experts, individuals, doctors, their occupational therapists, other health practitioners. These experts are able to provide detailed information on how that individual operates best and what they need to be successful. So again, benefits of hiring individuals with disabilities. We found that individuals with disabilities who are given a chance in the workplace tend to have higher rates of retention, are loyal and dedicated employees, and are very reliable. When we consider that 92% of consumers prefer companies who hire people with disabilities, you realize that hiring individuals with disabilities not only makes your workplace more inclusive, but makes your company more competitive in the marketplace amongst consumers and as an employer. And with today and talent being so challenging and so competitive in the market, really make utilizing individuals with people with disabilities and understanding that it makes you as an employer more competitive will actually benefit you in the long run. So overall, we're very proud to be an inclusive employer at Denninger's. Our goal is to ensure that everybody has the tools they need to be successful and ensure that everyone is provided with an equal opportunity in the workplace.
Thank you. Thank you, Morgan, for that. It's very insightful. And Donald, thank you for your presentation as well. So what we'll do now is we'll open it up to questions. Just raise your hand and then I can introduce you. Morgan, I've got one question because you and Donald both mentioned it about the benefits to the business and consumers. How do you let consumers know that you are let's call it, for lack of a better term, inclusive employer? Is there a way you do it, or is it just it's just known through the community?
So we've actually built up our reputation to be known through the community by partnering with agencies. As we mentioned, Donald spoke on, it's 22% of individuals who have a disability in Ontario. When you're partnering with those community members and you're actually tapping into that talent pool directly, the word gets around. So we got recognized this year and we were very thankful to receive Goodwill's recognition for Business Partner of the Year. So again, that was something that came with our efforts put into it, and we're recognized publicly on that achievement. So it comes with the effort that you put in. Individuals with disabilities recognize that you're putting in effort to access those community partners and actually putting in efforts to give them employment opportunities. So it comes along with that effort that employers put into it.
Great, thank you for that.
So,
sorry,
Morgan, does Denninger's purposefully go look for individuals with disabilities when hiring?
Yes, so actually one of our main talent pools is or targeting with agencies that we work with is individuals with disabilities and people with barriers to employment. So that also includes individuals such as newcomers to the country, accessing and providing that information. So not just posting on the job board, but connecting with the people who work for those agencies to make sure that they understand what we're looking for, the skills required, and what that day-to-day job looks like, so they can look at their resources and their network and to find the best suited person for that role.
I have a question, if I may.
Absolutely.
I know I've run across just people in the general community who seem to have the idea, especially employers, that, you know, if a person with a disability is being accommodated, that that's going to cause conflict with those who don't require accommodations. Have you found that has been an issue?
Personally, no. But that's our accommodations have been, as I mentioned, not very drastic. It's simple changes or simple things done to make sure that that person's being successful. The approach we do take, you do hear people being fearful of favoritism or the perception of favoritism because somebody gets to do something differently. We are clear that with our employees that we do support people to perform the best of their abilities, and that does require sometimes tweaking what the day-to-day looks like or providing extra support and resources. So it's making sure that everybody's aware that these support and resources are also available for them if it's required.
So it's not necessarily based on a sort of obvious disability. If someone requires an accommodation, they could come to you, and regardless of their situation.
Yeah, regardless of the situation. And then if they do fall into the requirement to accommodate, then we do so. But we do go through a process of verifying as well. So we talk to, for example, functional abilities forms. So for somebody who may require a physical accommodation, one common one we see a lot is lifting up to a certain weight. Individuals can only lift a certain amount. So having somebody else who is able to lift heavy partnered with them. From that part, we do, if somebody does come forward, anybody who requires support, extra support or resources, and anyone who requests an accommodation, we go through the process of verifying it with them and then discussing with them along the way of why or why not their accommodation is being approved.
Thank you.
I think if I just may jump in here, the what Morgan just mentioned speaks to the importance of having accommodation processes in place, and in particular, having accommodation processes that are available to all staff, because then everybody goes through the same process. And Erin, you mentioned accommodations for people with non-obvious disabilities or invisible disabilities. If you have the processes in place for all staff, then everybody has a ready-made opportunity to bring it up and have the discussion, because you as the employer are not expected to be the expert or using your powers of prescience to try and divine who is going to require an accommodation, who isn't, just by looking at them. The purpose is really having processes in place that facilitate the conversation for people.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Donald, and thanks, Erin, for the question. Any other questions from anyone?
I have a comment, and I'd like to get Donald's and Morgan's thoughts on it. I think that by just using the term disability, we're automatically almost disqualifying someone, when we know that everybody, all of us, have our own disabilities to any extent. So people who are in the hiring in HR know about the different personalities and how you're looking for different skill sets, and also different ways of looking at things for a certain position. So somebody who is very detailed oriented may be very good for quality control, but may not be good in the production line, because they need product running out the door very quickly. So that person with a very high level of detail would possibly could be considered a disability for him if you're wanting to hire this person for the production line, when that is not necessarily a disability. But we all have our own things that, like it or not, most people around us accommodate us, and they do it for different reasons. either because they have to or because they love us. But there are a lot of things that all of us bring to every environment that are not necessarily ideal, and people do accommodate us all the time. So are those disabilities, or I mean, where do we draw the line? And maybe we should just stop calling them that way and use different terms. What do you think?
Yeah. Is it okay if I go first, Donald?
Yeah, you go right ahead.
I think so. Definitely would not classify as a disability. I think that's when you start to look at strengths and weaknesses of an individual. And we hear more and more about the workforce and leadership focusing on utilizing people's strengths and skills to help them perform to the best of their abilities. Same when you look at a person with a disability, I think we want to look more at the ability side rather than the disability of what is this person able to do and what are their strengths. Same as you would look at any other candidate or any other resume that comes across. I would not be able to, as Donald mentioned, build a bridge that goes over water because I'm not an engineer. I'm not able to do that. But when you look at my strengths and what I'm able to do, what's best suited on that. So same when we look at people with disabilities, I think we have to start moving away from the disability and moving towards the ability of the individual person and utilizing that person's strengths to help them be successful, the same as we would with anybody else.
I'm glad you said that, Morgan, because I'm going to focus more on the other end of this of this point in terms of sort of drawing a line between where do you use the term disability and where don't you. I think we have to be careful talking about what might be disadvantages in certain environments based on particular skill sets. So people being a good fit in one environment and not a good fit in another, versus disability, which is something that doesn't go away when the person leaves the workplace, right? Disability is a lived experience that persists across multiple environments. I used a more social definition when I was giving my presentation because that is more useful. It's of greater utility when considering how to accommodate in the workplace and how to think about disability in the workplace. But there is a medical component as well, in as much as it's something that people experience across multiple environments. It might be physical, it might be intellectual. So I think it wouldn't be fair to say that everybody has a disability depending on the environment, because that in effect, or has the potential to diminish the experience of people who have disabilities. And so I'm going to give you an example that you may have come across, that a lot of us have probably heard that don't even really think about it. You may have heard of obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD for short. And something that seems to have found its way into our parlance is people who maybe have, they're a little more focused on certain things, or a little more, they might consider themselves a little more obsessed about certain things, saying, oh, I'm OCD about this, or, your friends might take a jibe at you and say, oh, you're being so OCD, but that you're not actually obsessive compulsive. So I'm very particular in the way my things are organized, right? I have very organized workspace. I have a nice library behind me that you can't see all of it. I have all sorts of things on display throughout my apartment. And I've had some friends make those comments to me because, they'll move something and I'll move it back. But the reality is, while I'm particular about where I keep my things and I want them to be in a specific place, people saying, oh, you're a little OCD, it misses the point of what actual obsessive compulsive disorder is, which is somebody not being able to get past a change or not being able to get past a certain element. So somebody with the germ variant of OCD, they may wash their hands and know their hands are clean, but then their brain is going to basically loop that thought that, oh, maybe my hands aren't clean and they need to wash it again, and they need to do it again, and they need to do it again. And it's sort of this feedback loop that they can't get out of, even though they intellectually know that they've done it and know that their hands are clean. Now, that's just one example. But I think, we need to be careful in terms of how we use the term. when it comes to disability, because as much as I say it's not a matter apart from all others, it's, you know, it's a part of the workforce. We don't want to neglect the different experiences of individuals who have disabilities, and that is why the mismatch between their experience of the world and the environments that they find themselves in exists. And we could say similar things about people in the LGBTQ2S+ community, racialized individuals, newcomers. You know, these are differences that persist across environments, and I think that's really where you're looking at that dividing line.
Thank you for that clarification, Donald.
You're welcome.
That was very good. Thank you.
No problem.
Yes, thank you, Donald. Any other questions from anyone? So thank you again, Donald and Morgan. That was great, very insightful. Donald, thank you for sharing that presentation as well. We'll get that out to everybody. We'll also share this recording with everybody because I know a couple people joined late. And Donald, if you're okay that I share your information with the attendees, just because if they have any follow-up questions, it would be great that they could reach out to you directly. That would be awesome. But thank you again. I think it was very insightful. And again, everybody will have a copy of this recording and the presentation shortly.